Hi, Mark Gilbert here, and in this video we're going to be doing a review of a book from 1949 entitled Out of This World, Thinking Fourth Dimensionally by Neville Goddard. Now, Goddard actually wrote under the name of Neville, and this book is available in the public domain if you want it. However, I have been reading the book from a great collection entitled The Power of Imagination. The link to this book is on my website, and it has a collection of Goddard's books, or Neville's books, I should say. Most of them are in the neighborhood of anywhere between 30, 40, 50 pages in length, and there's a few that are over 100. They give you a complete taste of his work. Goddard was a spiritual teacher who taught in the mid part of the 20th century. He was born in 1905 and died in 1972. And there's plenty of stuff out there on the internet about him. You can actually find recordings of him giving lectures and talks, and they're quite interesting. You'll see some links in the description below the website. And this book, as I may have mentioned, is in the public domain. You can actually get it, PDFs of it online. There's actually even a audio version of it online if you wish. However, you can also buy copies of it, and for relatively inexpensively. Now, you might be wondering what led me to going back and rereading Neville's work, and why am I doing a video here on a 1949 book that's available in the public domain? Well, the impetus for this was that I recently read a book by a colleague of mine, Mitch Horowitz, who wrote a book called The Miracle Club and How Thoughts Become Reality. Mitch is a New Thought historian who's written a good bit about the New Thought movement. And one of the things I like about Mitch is he's not somebody that once he comes to metaphysics, he puts his rational sense at the door. He still tests things, he still looks at them from a very scientific and rational standpoint, and offers alternative theories for things. And this is a good introduction to looking at the history of New Thought and some of the, perhaps the workings behind why thoughts do create reality. But Mitch describes himself as a believing historian. Let me just read a couple of quick quotes from his book. He says, "I try to be plain with readers and audiences that I am a believing historian, that I participate in many of the metaphysical movements and thought schools that I write about." Now, why does he do all of this? He goes on to add, "I do not view esoteric or alternative spiritual expressions as schisms, set apart from the historic march of faith. Rather, many non-traditional spiritual movements provide novel means and new windows on the perennial aim of all contemplative religion: refinement of the individual, heightened perception of reality, and the leavening of coarse ideas and relationships into finer ones. Religion, in its true form, aims to elevate the self and restore man to his highest nature." I like that quote. You know, so we tend to think of religion as these dogma and rules and churches and the institution of religion, but if we get back to the true purpose of religion, it really always has been to uplift man and his life, to give his life meaning, to give him understanding about why he's here, and to give him a roadmap on ways to live, which is why I was attracted to New Thought, and have read books like The Miracle Club and Out of This World and many others, and leading me into becoming a New Thought minister. Now, in reading The Miracle Club, it becomes apparent that Horowitz really values the New Thought teachings of Goddard. In fact, he devotes a whole chapter in his book to him, and says at the outset of the chapter that he considers Neville to be one of the best spiritual philosophers of the 20th century. In the chapter, he not only gives a brief description of Neville's life, but he also describes what he considers the 3 steps to truth that Neville essentially taught. Those steps were: 1, that every creative act begins with a passionate desire; 2, that your imagination is fertilized in a state of physical immobility; and 3, that it's important that you form a vivid, simple mental scene of your desire fulfilled. Those 3 steps were the steps that Neville taught, and ones we'll come back to as we look at the book Out of This World. Now, you might be wondering, who is the book Out of This World for? And I would recommend it for any students of New Thought or anyone who studies the law of attraction. because you've probably read other people's takes on how to manifest things through the power of your thought. And I believe Neville gives you an interesting alternate take. It's similar, but has its own nuances that I think will help deepen your understanding of the power of mind to create your reality. Just one little quick aside on the title of Neville's book, Out of This World, Thinking Fourth Dimensionally. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Our Spiritual Evolution, Transcending the Third Dimension, and I couldn't help think about that when I was reading Neville's book. And to a degree, there is some similarity in that my book was really about our evolutionary path and where we're headed as both an individual and as our species back into returning to remembering our truth and our unity to all that is, and that this third dimension is an experience that we're moving through, and one that we can transcend by mastering certain techniques. Well, those techniques include the ones that Neville talks about in his book. But when he talks about thinking fourth dimensionally, he's actually thinking about moving into the concept of altering your reality by changing your future events. Now, changing your future events may sound a little strange because we think, well, there's this march of time that we're moving through, and how can what I'm doing now have an impact on things that are going to come in the future? How can I go back and change the past? But to a degree, Neville says that we can get into and make impacts in this fourth dimensional experience of time. And he outlines in this brief book, it's only about 20 or 30 pages, means by which you can do that. What I'd like to do now is just give you a few quotes from this short book just to whet your appetite and maybe give a little bit of commentary on them. This first quote comes from the first page and talks about why he's writing it. He says, "My object in writing these pages is to indicate possibilities inherent in man, to show that man can alter his future, but thus altered, it forms again a deterministic sequence starting from the point of interference, a future that will be consistent with the alteration. The most remarkable feature of man's future is its flexibility. It is determined by his attitudes rather than by his acts. The cornerstone on which all things are based is man's concept of himself." So what Goddard is seeking to do is to get us to change how we look at ourselves, to see ourselves as a creator through the power of our thoughts, and to recognize that through that power we can actually alter the future. But what he says is that in our altering, we're setting in motion a sequence of events that will change the future, but it's then things will run on in sort of a deterministic way that way until we alter it again. Okay, let's move on and look at another quote later in the book. Here, Neville outlines what he says are the 3 steps to the creative process, the 3 steps for altering our future. And these actually correlate to the 3 steps that Horowitz was describing in the Miracle Club. But let me just read this quote from Neville. He says, "Let me again lay the foundation of changing the future, which is nothing more than a controlled waking dream. 1. Define your objective. Know definitely what you want. 2. Construct an event which you believe you will encounter following the fulfillment of your desire, something which will have the action of self-predominant. An event which implies the fulfillment of your desire. 3. Immobilize the physical body and induce a state of consciousness akin to sleep. Then mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action, imagining all the while that you are actually performing the action, here and now, so that you experience in imagination what you would experience in the flesh were you to realize your goal." Pretty simple, and I've been incorporating some of this into my life recently. You know, I've been using the power of thought, and I've been a student of New Thought for over 30 years, but I've been using the power of thought that long or longer. And a lot of the things that I do are in terms of affirmations, affirmative prayer, visualizations, and things that I've talked about in some of my other videos. But one of the key things that I like about what Neville is describing is the getting into a almost a sleep state. And so as I go to bed now every night, I visualize what it is that I'm desiring, and I visualize that outcome. What he's really trying to get us to do is to, once we know our goal, and I mean that's the very first thing we have to do, is to define what you definitely want in life, whether it's a job, wealth, relationships, happiness, etc., spiritual wisdom, success in the material world, success in the spiritual world, you name it, whatever it is that you're looking to seek, create that desire and hold it firmly in your mind, and then create that outcome in your mind of what that would look like. And then as you're going to bed, just basically feel into that. Feel as if it's in your life already. And that's what Neville says. And I think it's a good prescription for us in terms of how to create. Let's move on to a couple of other quotes towards the conclusion of this brief book, just to give you an even greater sense of what it's about. Towards the end, he writes, "My mystical experiences have convinced me that there is no way to bring about the outer perfection we seek rather than by the transformation of ourselves." I couldn't agree with that more, that all of the experiences that I've had really speak to the fact that it's by changing ourselves that we actually are changing the world. In fact, he says that later on. He says, to attempt to change the world before we change our concept of ourselves is to struggle against the nature of things. There can be no outer change until there is first an inner change, as within, so without. You know, it's easy to look out at that world out there and to want to push the river and to try to make things the way they are by brute human force. But what is key for all New Thought teachings, and is reinforced by Neville in this very brief book that I highly recommend that you read, is the concept that all change begins within. It's a change within our own consciousness, our own beliefs. If we can shift our own belief system to seeing and knowing the truth of what it is that we desire in the world around us, then that is what we're going to manifest. And we can alter the direction that our lives are going and the future that appears to be the one we're headed towards by moving into and altering the fourth dimension by using the techniques that are taught in New Thought and are described here by Neville. Check out the book. I hope you'll enjoy it. Till next time.